manufacturing in China takes a certain amount of trust. We get it because your suppliers are thousands of miles away, and there might be that creeping bit of doubt. Are they going to dilute my quality? Are they going to suddenly raise the prices thinking that they've got us over a barrel? Are they going to be misusing our IP and, maybe selling our product in competition with us behind our backs? There's a lot of legitimate concerns, and whilst perhaps these aren't that common, and it's certainly not going to happen to everybody, it can happen. And over the years, we've dealt with a number of customers who've come to us and they've been suffering from similar problems. And what Renaud's going to do today is he's going to take you through 10 of these cases and talk about the situations and talk about the ways that you can mitigate the risks of this happening to you and how you would handle such a scenario. So let's kick off episode 213 of the podcast today and get into it. You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Adrian hosting today. Renaud's with me. Hi, Renaud.
Hey, Adrian. Hey, everybody.
Renaud, what we've been doing for a while is when we hear of an issue, maybe it's from one of our customers or it's, from somebody that maybe we know is passing on a story to us or something like that. We normally write about this, and we've got a series of posts on Sofeast called Disputes with Chinese Suppliers and how to overcome them. And so you'll normally give your comments on what's happening and what can be done to overcome this, usually unfortunate situation, and what can be done to sort of sort out the mess that people have sometimes gotten themselves into or have been gotten into by their Chinese suppliers. And so you're on qualityinspection.org, you collected a bunch of these that we've written over the past years, and you kind of briefly went through them. And I think as a sort of cautionary tale, it's always good to look at these potential problems, because if you're listening, you could be affected by things like this, and hopefully you're not, but it could happen. So the tips that you're going to share today will hopefully go a long way to protecting people.
Yeah, this is the stuff of nightmare. I mean,
Mm.
but this is well, if you buy from Chinese suppliers, if you're lucky or you really do your homework and you prepare, you do proper due diligence, and you set the right rules from the start and all these kind of things, you might never see any of this. And I wish that that's the case. Unfortunately, well, there's good suppliers and bad suppliers, just like there's professional buyers and unprofessional buyers, and even sometimes, sneaky buyers and bad
Mm.
buyers. I don't know how to say that,
Mm.
right? So on both sides, there's good and bad. So we're not going to just knock on Chinese suppliers in general,
No, no.
but this is sort of a sampling of bad cases. So let's go right into it.
Yeah.
So what was number one about?
If your supplier refuses to ship the goods you paid for, I mean, that sounds insane. Is it? But it can happen.
Oh, it happens, and actually refuses could mean many different things.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes the supplier is in a pretty serious cash crunch. Okay. And they are just okay. So what happens is that maybe you have to send some down payment, and maybe you send a 50% down payment or something. In that case, that specific case that prompted us to write about this, the customers paid 70% upfront, which is very high. Okay. And then the supplier, well, get that money and funded the rest of their other orders because they needed the cash probably. And then they were like, well, this customer gave us 70%. Like, even a well-meaning supplier is going to hesitate a bit, right? Just because you put them in a situation that just doesn't make sense. The incentives are no longer aligned. Like,
Mm.
if they have strong short-term pressure, cash pressure, well, they would take the money, use it for something else, maybe pay the salaries of their staff, because otherwise they will not be able to pay for it, or pay a supplier that tells them, hey, you pay me now or else, or we'll send people to follow you and to do some send some gooks basically,
Mm,
um, cut a finger or something. So that's China, right? These kind of things do happen. The
mm,
suppliers that get really mad about late payments, well, they can resort to certain extremes. Okay, so suppliers are gonna take the money, pay something else for that, and then they have some other customers. Even if they want to serve you, they're thinking, wait a minute, these other customers, it's it's regular business. They only send me 20%, 30%. Maybe they negotiated even better terms, but if I don't serve them, there will be penalties. I will have to send by air, and everything is going to cost me an arm and a leg. And I'm going to lose some long-term business, so I'm going to kill my own business. So I'm going to serve them first. And then, and here we're talking about not very well managed companies, obviously, right? That are in that case. So they also fall behind on the deliveries, especially if they're short on cash. They might not be able to pay for all this, the suppliers on time. The suppliers are going to balk. The suppliers are going to be late in delivering because, hey, you're late in paying, right? And it has a lot of cascading effects. And then in the end, what happens is that they never even buy the components for your order. You were actually nice. You send them 70%, or sometimes I see some people still do that. They send 100% in advance because they're like, I really want to build some goodwill. I want to please the supplier or whatever. And the supplier feels, okay, this buyer doesn't know anything. I ask for 100% up front and they pay. I mean, okay, this is great. Of course, I'm going to get the payment. But then the whole situation is just really bad when it goes into that kind of vicious circle. Okay, and the
mm,
supplier just says, well, I gotta save my business. I guess, it's not so nice for these people, but I gotta do it. If I take the time to make production for them, the other customers are going to be yelling at me and forcing me to pay all kinds of things. So I need to always prioritize them in production. And then I just don't have the cash anymore for this order. So in some cases, that's what happens. In some of the cases, it's really just a really dishonest supplier, or it's like a scam, right? They really appear to be a supplier and so on, and then they take your money and disappear. And
mm,
this is not very uncommon, and especially like if you find them on online, if they push for a higher deposit than normal, but maybe in exchange the price is very good, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a chance. Yeah, okay, I send more money, but like the
mm,
price is so good, I cannot not take it. And then in the end, you're scammed. Like, yeah, the price was good, but you get absolutely nothing in exchange, in return, right? So that could also be the reason for this situation. So
mm,
it's all about, yeah, doing a bit of due diligence on the supplier. Make sure you don't get scammed, and just don't send very high amounts of money up front. Like a 70% deposit is just insane. Doesn't make
no,
any sense. There's no proper justifications for it. Just don't do
mm,
that because you put yourself in a bad situation. It's I would say it's partly the buyer's fault. Right?
mm.
So
So would you say 30% is the usual appropriate down payment?
yeah, yeah. Sometimes
Okay.
can be negotiated down a bit. Depends if it's
Hmm.
customized products or non-customized products. If it's
Mm,
non-customized products, you can negotiate it down a bit easier because if in the end you don't pay, they can just resell it to somebody else without taking a hit. But if it's a custom-made, custom designed product just for you, well, that's different.
mm.
They do take a risk. You need to send a bit more money.
Yeah, yeah.
There's some considerations such as this one.
Okay. Yeah. Good. So let's move on to number two then.
Yeah.
This is where your manufacturer is trying to force you to accept poor quality that you're actually not comfortable with. So
Mm.
presumably that's against your quality standard.
Yeah, exactly. So it does happen. And again, sometimes there's bad suppliers and sometimes there's bad buyers, frankly. And this is a very common one. I mean, it's always been the case. I've always seen such cases where the buyer picks a supplier, maybe doesn't really know, maybe doesn't even visit the factory, doesn't try to understand, okay, what kind of other products do they make? What is it? What kind of customers do they serve? What are these customers' quality requirements? What's sort of the focus of the factory? Do they tend to make, well, first, do they tend to make the kind of product that I want to buy? Right, that's one thing.
Mm.
So do they actually know the tips and tricks in that product category? But also, are they like are they focused on high volume, low cost types of products? Are they focused more on higher quality goods? Maybe are they focused on highly engineered, custom designed products versus doing always the same thing? Right?
Yep.
What's their focus? What is there a good fit? Right? And if you don't do that, you end up probably with a supplier that is not a good fit for your company. And then in that case, it's really painful. It's really painful. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, but have you actually made it clear what your quality standard would be? Right? Have you even documented a bit and given them some examples of things that you consider as defectives and unacceptable? Right?
Mm.
Um, or have you just say, yeah, okay, and I want good quality, and then that just means nothing because every supplier will say, oh yeah, we make good quality, no problem. Oh,
Ah,
you know what?
yeah.
The suppliers of cheap products from Iwu, making arts and crafts with products, with 10% defectives on average in every batch. You ask them, hey, and they will say, yeah, sure, yeah, we make good quality, that's fine. That's what our customers are happy with. But
Mm.
customers pay a lot of attention on pricing, but to them, it's like normal. Every customer is like that, right? Every
Mm.
customer that works with them is like that. So in their mind, every customer is like that, and every customer is happy with that kind of crappy, product quality because that's what these kinds of customers want. So I want good quality means absolutely nothing. You need
Yeah.
to actually explain what it is. And in the Chinese mindset, if you buy at a low price, you kind of automatically accept low quality. It's considered,
Mm.
just fair and like normal and reasonable, right? And then if suddenly you say, no, 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 like I want that level of quality, I want no blemish on the product, larger than 0.5 millimeter. I want, I want the gap between these two parts to be, whatever,
Mm.
no more than, zero point 0.3 millimeter, blah, blah, blah. And then everything else is rejected. And they're going to be like, what? You're just unreasonable, right? If you had told us about that, well, the price would be very different because we need to do a lot of extra work and you know, uh, do more inspection, more scrap, more whatever, reprocessing, rework, etc. Because these suppliers, they don't know how to actually, through their processes, do much better quality usually, right? If you really go
Mm.
with bottom of the barrel kind of manufacturers, they have no clue. So in their mind, it's all about doing more inspection and rejecting more and reworking more and so on. So it's more cost, right? So
Mm.
yeah, that one is very common. Now there's, as I mentioned, there's bad suppliers, also bad buyers. There's
Mm.
buyers that sell into, that sell consumer goods at a relatively low price point, and but then they go back to the factory and they say, why do I have a defective unit here? And suppliers are like, well, out of a batch of 3,000 pieces, one defective unit is no problem, right? It's totally acceptable, and the customer is like, no, 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 this is just not acceptable. We want zero. Like, what? You want zero defect? And you tell us now? Like, you want
Mm.
automotive levels of quality, uh, for your $20 product that, where we don't make much margin at all. And, this is just nonsense. So it's, um, it's got to be
Yeah.
reasonable. Yeah, but
You
it
manage
needs to be
manage
communicated in
expectations.
advance. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. The expectations. Yes, yes, exactly, exactly.
I like where you're going with this because you're highlighting some of the missteps made by the buyers as well as some of
Mm.
the, bad behaviors or
Yeah,
I don't know, shady behaviors from suppliers as well. And I think it is
right.
important because probably for a lot of these, there are reasons why buyers have put themselves potentially in those positions as well.
Very often it compounds.
Mm,
So you have a well-organized buyer knows what they want and everything. When the supplier starts to go a bit shady or whatever, up they will be brought back, in
yeah.
line, and then over time the buyer would just drop them and so on. But when you have both sides, it just compounds into some kind of explosive situation often.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So
Okay.
what's number three?
If the supplier has failed to prepare export packaging of your products for your scheduled quality inspection, sorry, American listeners, scheduled.
Right, right, right. So yeah, that's typical. Like, yeah, a client says, "Hey, need you to go and inspect the production," and so on. It's a final inspection. Oh, final inspection,
Mm,
okay. So then we say, okay, we tell the factory, okay, so um, we need to see the packaging also. The products need to be packaged. Then we go there, and well, like nothing is ready in terms of
mm,
packing, and they don't really have a plan for export packing. And the customer, okay, that also, customers issue here because packaging and packing are part of the bill of material, they're part of the design of the product, right? So sometimes the customer would say, oh, okay, you sell whatever, like mugs or salt and pepper sets or whatever. To other customers, oh, okay, okay, well, you're used to it, like you're professionals in that. Oh, packing, like, okay, just do what you do with your other customers.
Oh no.
And that comes back often, actually. Well, usually the buyer does this once or twice and then they learn. I should never say that again
Mm,
because number one, the buyer doesn't know, so the supplier could do whatever, usually the cheapest option, and the buyer can never complain because the
mm,
customer, the supplier can always say, well, that's what we do for the customers, and it's fine. Not fine with you. I don't know why, but for them it's fine. And you cannot verify, right? So you cannot even fault them. It's 100% on your shoulders.
mm,
Um, or the customer will say, they try to be a bit smarter, or they work with a lawyer that tries to be a bit smart. They say, well, they need to be like perfectly in condition, good condition for selling, blah 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 blah, and the packaging has to protect them adequately, etc. So you set some high level expectations without going into the specifics.
mm,
That is not sufficient. The buyer should, review and approve at least. And some buyers, of course, design the packaging and everything and specify the final packing. But at least they should request, okay, give me some photos of what you're going to do, specify like what kind of carton, whatever.
mm,
Is it going to be 5 plies, 7 plies? Can it handle the compression weight of 70 kilos? Because if it's going to be at the bottom of the pile, it's going to get crushed by the other ones.
yeah.
Does it have to be on pallets? Does it have to be strapped, etc., etc.? So again, um, inexperienced and or lazy, and or disorganized buyer, um, that's usually the root cause of the issue here, right?
Mm,
The customer is responsible for that. Why you ask the supplier to be responsible for that? I mean, they don't know your supply chain. They don't know what you're going to do with the cart. They don't know if you're going to open the cartons, do some changes, put the products back, and like ship it again in the same packaging or something. Yeah, they have no clue. They don't know, right?
mm.
So this
And
is
with
definitely on the buyer's shoulder. Mm.
and with packaging, I think you've said it before for sure. this is not something that should be an afterthought, which is I think what you're alluding to
Right.
here.
Yeah.
And what's more, it's something that you should start thinking about and designing pretty early during the product development process for the actual product itself, right?
Um, well, pretty early, it depends, but at least you should start to think about it.
Yeah.
And you should not wait until the last moment, especially if you want something a bit nice, right? And if you need custom printing on it, it just takes time. And then you get the samples and you don't like something and you need to redo it and so on and so forth. It can take time and then it's not ready and you have to delay your shipment. Of course, you need to start earlier. And then if the product is relatively fragile and high value, definitely you need to do some reliability testing on the carton. And I think
Yeah.
you talked before with Andrew about the ISTA 1A and 2A standards,
Yeah.
and there's some other standards, right? Whatever, the FedEx standard, the Amazon standard, etc.
Yeah, that
For
you're
how to
right. They do have
test,
their own, yeah.
yeah, how to test and the cartons, when they are dropped, when they are compressed, and when they have vibrations and so on. How does it actually protect the product? So
Hmm.
all of this is product design. It should be the buyer's side, or at least if you buy standard of the shelf product with standard of the shelf packaging, you need to review and approve. Right? Don't just skip it.
Yeah, wise words. That
Mm-mm.
makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Let's
Mm.
move on to four then. When your supplier has disappeared with your tooling and or inventory.
Right. So that happens from time to time, and sometimes the
Mm.
supplier's company just actually, yes, disappears, like goes under, or they've been sued and they just, close the company, or they just lost too much money and they go out of business. Maybe the boss disappears, maybe hasn't paid the salaries and social insurance and everything, hasn't paid the suppliers, hasn't paid the taxes. It's
Mm.
sometimes a big mess. Sometimes they really disappear. And in that case, forget about your tooling, forget about your inventory, forget about any legal recourse against a company that anyway is not honoring its debts or anything and is just completely failing and disappearing. You're not going to go physically and get your tooling or your inventory. The staff that hasn't been paid, they're not going to release anything. They might
Mm.
sell it for scrap, and you might hear about that too late. So that's one thing. But then sometimes it's like a new supplier you don't know, and then you get scammed. So of course they disappear, or it's a relatively long-term supplier, and maybe they decided to stop doing business with you for some reason. They found that you were quite unreasonable, and they just drop you, and that's it. And they're really bad. We don't want to help them. Stop responding to their email or something, right?
Yeah.
Maybe maybe you owe them money. You don't want to pay them. You say that there's chargebacks because of poor quality, and they don't agree, and you go into some kind of dispute, and then they say, well, you know what, this guy, just cut them out, and we don't want to hear about them anymore. That sometimes happens.
Mm.
So yeah, that's bad. But if it gets to that point, it's pretty much nothing to do usually.
I suppose it's a symptom of, like you're getting production done in China. It's, I don't know, 7,000 miles away from where you are. So you do have to have a certain amount of faith and trust that your tooling, which is not with you, it's in the factory in China. If it's not your
Mm,
factory, someone else has got it, for
mm,
example. And that's really important piece of equipment, expensive equipment, and it's also,
yeah,
your IP. So you've got to be sure if it's got to the point where relations have totally broken down then sure. But I suppose on a case by case basis, if it was us and we encountered like this, we would be looking at the history of it and thinking, well, how did we get here? Because I don't think it's always going to be very likely that a supplier will just disappear and with your
mm,
tooling and
mm, mm.
inventory. It can happen, as you said, but there's probably a history to it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and sometimes it's because of an intermediary that was the supplier,
Mm,
and they have a big fallout with the factory, and the factory says, go to hell, we don't want to talk to you anymore. The trading company, the intermediary cannot get the tooling or anything back, and then they don't know what to say, and they're like, they lie down, okay, well. we're losing that business, and we're going to be liable for all these things. So let's just
Hmm.
disappear.
Yeah.
That mm,
And that's a cautionary tale about working with trading companies, which we'll come on to.
right. Yeah, and sometimes it's just really bad communication, or like the key contact person is sick for a while or something, and the others are just too busy to think about contacting the customers. Maybe there's only one English speaking person in the factory. Yeah, who knows, right? Yeah, there could be 10 different things.
Mm. Okay.
Mhm.
Five, whizzing through these, handling a supplier who won't provide important supply chain information. So you've got
Mm,
that lack of transparency issue.
right. So that's all well, all good, until you really need to know who makes such and such component. And we
Mm,
talked about that before, but there are compliance requirements here and there, and there's going to be more and more, especially for selling into the European Union, where a certain level of traceability, transparency is going to be required.
yeah.
Otherwise, the product is just not going to be compliant. That's the whole idea of the product passport, the digital product passport, right?
Mm,
So in that specific case, yeah, that was an NSF certification for drinks machines, so things that, anyway, there's certain specification for things, how to say, um, the type of equipment that cleans the drinking water, or
yeah.
purifies it, or these types of things. Okay, so to get certified, you actually need to say, well, this is where we source the plastic that's going to be in that pot that's in contact with water, and this is where we buy these pipes, and this is where we buy the motor, and so on and so forth. And if you work with a supplier that says, sorry, this is our secret, we cannot tell you about that. Well, what do? You get to go and work with another supplier. But if you're already working with the supplier, and you're kind of stuck with them, and so on and so forth, that might be difficult. Okay, but it's not unusual. It's not unusual. And at one point, that specific customer had to tell them, look, I'm talking to other factories because I have to switch, and then to show them really, like, I'm talking to other suppliers. I'm getting, this is the quotes I'm getting. They made some samples, blah blah blah. To really show I'm serious, I'm going to switch. But if the
Mm,
supplier just doesn't budge, then yeah, you get to go and switch. You get to,
mm.
you get to. And this is NSF certification, but there's going to be more and more of that. Just
Oh,
because,
yeah.
and again, for compliance requirements from the European Union Commission, right? Not um, not a random body, right? The body that actually decides what you can put on the market or cannot put on the market, what the rules are.
Mm.
They make the rules, and that's going to be the rules. So there's going to be more and more of that in the coming years.
Yeah. And from a logical perspective, because we are talking about market access here, if you don't know anything about your
Mm,
supply chain or much about your supply chain, you're
mm,
setting yourself up for trouble in the future because as soon as somebody asks if it's a market surveillance authority, that's the worst case, I suppose. But as soon as somebody asks and your answer is, I don't know. I mean, if it's
mm.
America, do your products have components that can be traced back to Xinjiang in them? I don't
Right.
know. Well, you can't sell that in the States then. And that's
Oh,
the
this
worst
blocked.
case. Yep,
Will be blocked by
absolutely.
customs and destroyed after a while. Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
example. Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so I think generally, I suppose we would say if you can get supply chain information, that is really
Mm,
important.
mm,
Okay.
right. hmm So what's
Number
the next one?
six. Yeah,
Hmm?
the classic, the classic. You catch your supplier selling your products as their own. Probably you might see it on their website or something.
Yeah, right. In that case, the supplier sent a marketing email to a bunch of companies, including them,
Hmm.
showing various. products that they presented as their own products, ready to be purchased. And the customer say, "Oh, this is my product. Like we designed this product, we developed this product, we have all IP rights to this product. What is it doing here? What are you, why are you trying to sell it to other companies? Like, are you already manufacturing it for other companies? I don't like what's going on here, right?" The supplier would be like, "Oh, no, no, it's just to show like the examples of products we can make." Yeah, yeah, sure,
Sure
right?
is, yeah, yeah.
So there's a bit of difficulty for customers in policing always the suppliers here, because it happens so often. You walk around and you see your own products, like on a trade show. You say,
Hmm.
"Well, this is my product. What is doing here? Oh, you have to remove it." Oh, and then some people will say, like, "I take the samples with me in my bag right now, so you stop selling it." To which the supplier might say, "Well, wait a minute, like you haven't paid for these samples, right?" But it depends really on the relationship between them. Some people find it on the Alibaba pages or on the website. Some people find it in emails. Some people find it in the showroom. Sometimes their product is like a special place in, like in the center of the showroom, and like, "Whoa, look at this really nice product." Well, why is my product in your showroom and you're putting it forward like this in such an obvious way, right? Um,
Mm.
have you already sold it to other companies? Maybe I should know about that, right?
Mm.
So you have legal ways, legal tools to put pressure on the supplier so that if they actually sell it to another company, you can sue them for all kinds of damages and things like that. Of course, okay. But what's the chance that you will actually have the proof that they sold the product to that other company somewhere, right? Like, I don't know, you find your product on Amazon. First, okay, what's that company on Amazon? How to contact them? And who made the
Mm.
product for them, right? So some companies are smart and they have different ways to see if the manufacturer that they work with is going to just do whatever night shift or so something else, usually in their brother's factory somewhere else or something. So you there's no chance that you see it. And then, for example, they would have a certain, I don't know, a certain chemical formula for something, for a part of the product.
Mm.
And if the supplier keeps using the exact same, well, they can test it and see if it's exactly the same. And they might have one substance that has nothing to do there. Like, there's no logic for it to be there. It's very easy and cheap and quick to test. If you test and you find it, well, it means it's very probably your supplier, right? Because otherwise, why would another supplier make that substance um, that part of the product with that substance inside? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, right? There's just
Mm.
one way to do it. There's many ways to handle that, right? Depends on the product also. So yeah, that's a tricky one. Sometimes buyers just have suspicions, and if the products look much cheaper, which is often the case. Okay, it looks
Mm.
much cheaper, might not be done by my own manufacturer because it would look nicer, But who organized that? Yeah, maybe it's my manufacturer put that in his cousin's factory and they did a really crappy job and they cut the cost everywhere, and now it's coming
Yeah.
out on my market, right? Or maybe not.
Mm.
Like, how to know? Usually, there's no way to know. It's just
Mm.
the sad truth, the
Yeah.
sad truth about
Not
it.
not not in China. Too
Mm.
big, too many people. And it could be in a completely different area, I guess. But the problem with that is, let's say the cheap, crappy version of your product comes out and they're starting to sell it on Amazon or wherever, and it's not as good as your product, but the problem is it's eating up all of your market share, and people
Might. Yeah, it
maybe
might
they
be
don't want to
half the
spend.
price.
Yeah, maybe they don't want to
Right.
spend $70 on your products when they can spend 25 on this one, so it puts you in an
Yeah.
extremely difficult position. But I suppose when it comes down to it, it all comes back to due diligence, careful
Mm,
sourcing and
mm,
careful supervision of the supplier and having the right contracts in place and
mm.
yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Mm. Okay.
So what's number seven?
Seven, again, another classic. Your factory, and I'm using air quotes here, turns out to be a trading company. So you've already
Mm,
alluded to this particular point in one of them earlier, but let's go into
mm.
this.
Yeah. So uh, what we find is that a lot of companies that have very little experience with China at one point will start to buy something from China.
Hmm.
And maybe they develop their own product, maybe they buy something off the shelf or whatever. Often they develop something, or they um, yeah, they develop something, and then they say, oh, okay, we need an agent. Usually that's the word they use. We need
Hmm.
someone to help us, an agent, and they work with that, quote unquote agent. Um, and then the agent say, oh, okay, I found this factory. Oh, okay, they can do this. Oh, I can do this. Da 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 da. Da. And then we need, okay, let's go ahead. Here's the invoice. Yeah, yeah, it's okay. Like, here's the invoice, and actually, it's the agent's company. So the agent like morphs into a trading company and ensures that the buyer never has enough information to jump over them and go direct to the manufacturer. Right. So that's one way that it happens. Very
Hmm.
common. And then the buyer kind of wakes up and like, oh, but we don't know anything about our supply chain. It's all in the hands of that whatever, Mr. Lee. And now he doesn't want us to know anything. What do we do now? Right. So you don't really own your supply chain. You don't control anything. It's all in the hands of one person. This is very uncomfortable. And one person
Hmm.
who's making how much margin? You have no idea, right? That's bad. But then, yeah, in some other cases, you have trading companies that say, yeah, 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 we make this, and sometimes you even fly to whatever wherever they are in Shanghai, and then they bring you to, oh yeah, 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 like I own the factory. Let me show you the factory, and they go in there, and they even put their logo in the factory.
Yeah.
And then they show stuff around like, oh yeah, yeah, oh this, and we can do this and we can do this, blah blah blah. And then when there's like a technical question, they ask someone at the factory who actually is the owner. It was like, okay, let me ask the production manager. You know, and then there's all kinds of smokes and mirrors, and a company can be buying from such an intermediary for years without even noticing that they don't. It's just a couple of guys in an office.
Hmm.
So that and then maybe the relationship turns sour between them and the factory, and then it's totally out of control, or whatever happens, right? Or they become too greedy, they push the prices up, or or there are some quality issues, something needs to be changed, but they don't want to give the details. There's all kinds of things, like symptoms, let's say, of this kind of
Hmm.
situation. So in some cases, it can work well, I guess, but usually when we are called in to to talk to companies that are in that situation, usually it's because they have big problems. So maybe
Hmm.
we are biased, but we see a lot of problems with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's something that we've written about a lot as well. We've talked about it. So again, show notes, identifying trading
Mm.
companies and understanding the difference between trading companies and going direct to a factory. That's definitely worth doing. Number
Mm.
eight, coping with an
Yeah,
unexpected price increase from suppliers, and I dare say an unwelcome price increase as well.
well, it's never welcome, right? Is it?
No.
Um, so yeah, this one is pretty common also. And that's usually when you're operating without a manufacturing agreement that set things straight and without transparency into what happens. So if you don't have transparency, you don't know how much, I don't know, the PU is costing you versus the aluminum is costing you, and whatever that battery is costing you. You
Mhm.
don't really have an idea about the rough proportions of cost of the different elements that make up the final product. You don't have any idea how much goes to the assembly factory for the labor and testing and so on. And they don't want you to know. Okay. So when, okay, well, year on year, the salaries increase. So they can say, well, salaries increased 20%. So raise the price by 20% or something like that. And you're like, wait a minute, but surely salaries are no more than, I don't know, 10% or 20% of the price, right? And you're like, yeah, but no, but for the components, it's the same. They all raise the price 20% because their salary also went up 20%. Blah, blah, blah. But then you look and you say, well, aluminum makes up a good part of the product, but the cost of aluminum went down recently. So how does that factor in your calculations? And they're like,
Mm.
yeah. And then you just haggle and then, okay, let's do with 15%. And then next year or in 6 months, they might hit you again. Oh, there's a lot of issues with this special operation. We have a lot of scrap. We need to push the price up 10%. What? Why? You didn't tell us before about these issues. Yeah, but this supplier is really mad about that and just push the price up a lot. What do you mean a lot? How much? They pushed. So in the end, it's like plus 10%. Sorry, cannot do anything. And then you haggle and you get it down to 7% or 5%.
Mm.
You know, so this usually goes back to points, what, seven, and like maybe you're working with a trading company, doesn't tell you anything. Point number
Mm.
five, supplier doesn't give you enough information about your supply chain. These are the types of issues that it might surface. It's like a symptom, right,
Mm.
of of a bad situation. It's just too tempting for a supplier. They
Mm.
push and they get much more money, right? So
Of course.
why would they not push? Of course, right?
Yep.
Um,
9, your current supplier blocks the transfer of your mold tooling to a new supplier.
right. So this one, if your product has plastic parts typically that are custom designed, then you had to get a custom tooling for that plastic
Yep.
injection mold. And that's just an example. There's some others like silicone, much cheaper usually, but it could be some other things like cutting dies or whatever. Okay. Or obviously die casting also, or casting for some metal parts also require relatively expensive molds, right? So these molds, sometimes if you buy custom off the shelf products, you don't pay for the mold. Actually, you pay for the mold indirectly when you buy the product, right? So you don't
Mm.
really care about what happens to the mold as long as they can keep supplying good products to you. That's all you care about, right? But if you custom design some parts that need molds, usually you cannot convince the supplier to just pay for the mold themselves and so on, and just like amortize the amount over time. Actually, it's usually not a good idea for the buyer side to do that. So very
Mm.
often the buyer side pays for the tooling, but the tooling physically resides at the supplier's factory. And then if the relationship goes bad and maybe the supplier has all kinds of issues, I don't know, long delays and they push the price up and quality standard is not high enough. I mean, go back to the earlier points we mentioned today. Then at one point you might say, okay, I'm going to switch to another supplier. And then when you've lined up the other supplier, you've made sure this time you're on proper ground and you documented the quality standard and so on, and you,
Mm.
you audited them carefully and they signed a contract and so on. Then it's time to pull the tooling that you paid for. It's your tooling, right? And then you say, okay, well, guys, like next week we're gonna come and pick up the tooling. And then how's it gonna work? How's it gonna play out? Not very well. It's the very clear sign that you're saying bye bye and never see you again, right? Usually you pull the entire business out of their factory in that case. So depending on the way you break the news, depending on your timing, hopefully there's no orders underway. Very often this happens once the orders have already dried up,
Mm.
mostly, right? Maybe you built up some inventory because you know there's going to be a time with no production and so on. And you say, okay, I'm going to pull the tooling. And then the suppliers go, whoa, maybe they don't respond for a while. Maybe they say, well, yeah, you paid for the fabrication of the tooling, but you did not pay for the design of the tooling. And that took us a lot of time. Or, well, you paid for something, but actually it cost us, two times the price, and so on and so forth. So this is quite common. We also um, wrote another article recently um, about suppliers that say, oh, well, you want us to make the tooling and then later you want to move the tooling somewhere else, well, you get to pay 20%, or
Yeah.
somewhere between 15 and 30%. Very, very common. It's like an unwritten rule that they really feel extremely strongly about, and good luck to negotiate with them about that. So very frustrating because to the buyer, it's very simple. Look, it's my product. It's my tooling that I paid for. I can do whatever I want. And you're basically keeping my tooling hostage and asking me to pay for ransom to get it back. That doesn't fly. But if you don't have proper contract with, clear enforcement, very fast and so on, well, maybe you really have to pay the ransom. It feels very bad.
Mm. Mm.
That's the situation.
Well,
Yeah.
possession and the fact that they're so far away, yeah, unfortunately, and yeah, it's well, that's a worrying one. Okay, and the last one,
Mm.
being worried
Yeah.
about how to keep your sensitive product IP secure. And I think this is something that probably almost anybody that's manufactured in China or abroad even has been concerned about over time.
Right. So how to make sure I don't teach the manufacturer how to make my product and then they compete directly with me, um, or whatever, their cousin that I never heard of in a garage somewhere, maybe two streets behind, is um, is going to make the same product or something very similar, or maybe use my brand name, or once they know the customers that I sell into because of the labeling and so on, maybe they go and knock on the door of this supplier, these customers, and say, "Hey, well, actually, we are the manufacturer of this," right? Very, very harmful to any business, obviously. So there's legal tools, obviously, you know, non-disclosure, non-use, non-circumvention agreement, and then a proper manufacturing agreement with the proper terms and so on. We talked about that before. There's also non-legal ways to do that. Make sure you work with companies that have a business model generally of making products for other companies, not pretending, that, oh, we have the wide range of our own products. That of course,
Mm.
the risk shoots up by a magnitude of 10, maybe, right? And there's all kinds of other things. Obviously, we don't have time to go into this, but I think in a
No.
few episodes we have something to touch on this because it's such a wide topic. So we'll get back to the topic of intellectual property protection.
Yeah, and I've got links to other content that we've created on all of these topics, and I'll try and include a bunch of them in the show notes. So if you want to go and dive into
Mm.
them and explore more, whether it's keeping IP, safe, or whether it's identifying a trading company or any of the other topics that we've discussed today,
Mhm.
then you can totally go click on those links and have a look. Renaud, thanks. It's been some good tips, some things to think about if we are importing from China for sure. Useful
Mm.
ones. So thank you.
Yeah, great. All right. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.